inordinately, but I've muted my internal, and hopefully it's repaired it, but in the event it hasn't, which I don't expect it has since I haven't changed anything substantively, that is tough to tell you. I went back and listened to the old one. It wasn't unlistenable so those 10 minutes unfortunately wasted. What we're going to do is simply do things a little out of order at this point to more functionally use this time, talk about the more pending issues first, and then discuss it. So use this time to talk about the more pending link. Now we're just going to burn through this as efficiently as possible, starting in about 15 seconds, and then get back to figuring out why the hell the tech malfunctions once a month like this. At least it was random Saturday, but it is what it is. I have retweeted. So let's talk about some of the more substantive issues we've talked about. Obviously, James Harden's price has come up to the point where it is more of a discussion fading him, even in the environment he is in. That dealing with, no Eric Gordon, no Chris Paul, the run he is on of scoring and overall production over the last 10 or 12 games or so is obviously impressive, though at the same time I think we should all be prepared to suggest that it must end at some point. You can draw narratives talking about fatigue. The matchup isn't certainly the best one. We have had games in the last couple of years where we've had Paul without Harden against the Trailblazers. We haven't had any of the converse games, but choosing whether or not to deploy him in this space really comes down to looking at it ends up being a little bit more of a site-specific issue. With more value opening up with the news in Philadelphia and everything else going on there, I do think it is now, obviously a little bit more tolerable of a situation when we have, some decent cost-saving plays. It certainly makes it more possible to spend the extremely difficult prices you are getting for James Harden. So, generally, if you built your lineups now as opposed to building them an hour ago, you should be a little more inclined to play James Harden. This is a pretty similar situation where he should be fairly heavily owned, but at this point the ownership should have come down again a little bit over the last half hour, an hour, with the news that we have no Jimmy Butler and a lot of people pivoting to Joel Embiid, who carries a pretty similar upside, obviously not as high. We're probably not going to get the 90 out of Harden that we've seen recently, but the matchup was already an exceptional one for him. He has, I believe, only 2 career games. I have notes on them, but I don't have actual boxes in front of me. We'll see if I can pull them up real quickly, but he has only 2 career games, I believe, as starts against DeAndre Jordan, and my somewhat flippant notes here indicate that he pushed DeAndre's shit in. Let me see if I can more precisely quantify how good he looked against him. So, there are 2 games in which they have played against each other. They both played, 35 minutes or so in all these games. And his 2 lines in these games last year, which were the 2 games, obviously, between the 76ers and the Mavs. He had 32 and 16 with 2 assists and a block, and 29 and 16 with 2 assists, a steal, and 3 blocks. So it was already, obviously, a tremendous matchup, which carried with it a significant upside. In the absence of Jimmy Butler, makes it a little more likely that he will forcefully assert himself and seek that out. So due to the absence of any other center plays that I'm particularly over the moon about, especially on FanDuel, even at 11.5, I like him now a little bit more as a play compared to James Harden. Also because, again, there are a horde of other plays that I like at shooting guard, even with the 2 spots there. I like both the players in the late night hammer game, that being Buddy Hield and Klay Thompson. Some of the value plays which have come to pass also exist at that spot. So pretty big fan of moving some of your exposure to either Harden, who I still would have as my top projected player, or Davis, or playing Harden and Embiid makes a lot of sense. And I imagine that my first lineup at this point would have a lot of Harden and Embiid and sliding in some of these pretty interesting value plays we have. Let's talk for a minute about, Rodney Hood is out. That opens up some more interesting plays for us, for a Cavaliers team that we should get them being the lowest owned guys here. So we're going to talk about them in a minute, but we're going to have the Cavs in an exciting game environment at home against the Pelicans, -4 guys now. We should have no Dellavedova, no Nwaba, no Ante Zizic, and now no Rodney Hood. Combination of those 4 things will give us some options from that game that will be well lower owned than the ones from, say, Philadelphia that we're talking about here. Talking for a minute about the Warriors and the Kings in that spot. This has been a tremendous matchup for fantasy production for a few years now, actually. The Kings, after losing, I think it was 13 consecutive games to the Warriors until, I want to say, about 2.5 years ago, have played them pretty tight for the last 2.5 years or so. They've played twice this year. The Warriors won both those games, but in competitive contests, I want to say like 2 points and 5 points, something like that. Last year, they split their 4 games. Now, one of the games this year, you had no Steph Curry, which is certainly relevant. But it's particularly with the fact that we are playing in Sacramento, it is not a game that seems as likely to blow out as possible. And there are going to be a number of good plays from this game. I would be really surprised if there weren't. That would require an absolute curb stomping by one team against the other, which, again, I don't think is that likely. So if I'm building a lineup or 2 lineups, I'm trying to get a piece of this game. I'm trying to get 2 pieces of this game. And lineup construction makes that really difficult tonight because it's hard to not want to build with an eye towards Joel Embiid or James Harden just to start with those 2 guys. And at that point, becomes pretty difficult to get some of these other characters. But they all, just going over some stats that I pulled up a while ago. So if you look at, Klay Thompson has at least 30 fantasy points in 7 out of his last 8 against the Kings, including a 47 and a 55. So obviously there's some upside there in tournaments. Shout out to EMAC for shooting guards against the Kings as his favorite thing. Kevin Durant has 48 and 9 out of his last 10 against them, and 55 and 4 out of those 10, and 74 once in the first game this year, although that game did come without Steph Curry. But it is reduced price where you're paying 92, 94, even 10K on FanDuel for Kevin Durant. He's consistently, giving you 50 to 55 in this matchup. That feels just fine. Again, maybe you get 85 out of Harden. That's money well spent, but 10 grand for Durant getting you 55 feels pretty good if it's that, or 13 grand getting you 70 for Harden. So certainly an option, and probably at this point, and again, I tend to be more interested in tournaments at the cheaper members of the Warriors. We talked about this last time. I liked Klay and Draymond more in that game, and that turned out to be the right way to go, and I tend to fall that way more often than not. Tonight, Durant is actually my favorite member of the Warriors. I would go Durant, then Klay, then probably Draymond, then Steph. Steph comes in first, and I still like Steph quite a bit. And again, this has been a matchup in which he's been fine. He's actually exceeded 60 fantasy points against the Kings 4 out of his last 7 times, including the last time he played. He had 61 in his only game against them this year. I against the data, still preferred Durant a little bit, but I really like all these guys in a matchup that really ends up being conducive to an awful lot of fantasy production. But literally every other game out of the last 7, you got 60 out of Steph. You get 70, 49, 62, 38, 68, 41, 61 in the last game. And it's a fine spot for Draymond as well, who has 34 or more in 9 out of his last 10, including a 48 and 2 over 50. So just all these guys make a lot of sense in tournaments. Even if you look over across the ball, De'Aaron Fox, prices come back down a little bit because he's been out of form for a little bit. But a matchup I'm perfectly excited about, and he got, I think, 49 the last time. It's not loading for me at the moment. I want to say that he had 49 the last time these two teams got together. But the pace in this game, looking at over-under around 239. Neither team on a back-to-back. Should be pretty juicy. The split is actually one of the best splits in the NBA for Buddy Hield. His last 4 games against the Warriors, 42, 44, 34, 38. Those are all reasonable numbers to look at for taking a shot at him in a tournament, even with the price being up. For a couple of years, it was a tough spot for Willie Cauley-Stein, but this is a Golden State team that has not been as difficult for opposing centers to find some decent production, and including this year, whereas it was tough for Willie for a number of years in a row. In his the when they played in December of this year, he had 45 or so fantasy points. And we saw recently, obviously, the massive game from Capella, and at his price, certainly not someone I would remove from my rankings. As far as ranking the Kings, I would probably go Fox, Hield, Bogdanovich, Bielitsa, now that we know Bagley is going to be out. Also an interesting spot if you do think somehow this game blows out. There's some interesting tournament plays as far as Justin Jackson is going to get some blowout run, and Harry Giles, who's playable either way, who has basically stepped in front of Costa Koufos. A little concerned with running Willie Cauley-Stein is that he is now sharing minutes a little bit more than he used to be, coming in under 30 a couple times, and if it's not the best matchup, and he's giving time to both Koufos and Giles. But I'm still fine with it because Bagley was out. If Bagley was out, that was a fourth guy I wouldn't have been surprised. Saw some center minutes, so I would have wanted to look that way. Let's talk about some other stuff, again, going as rapidly as we can. Talking about those Cleveland Cavaliers in what represents a pace-up spot for them. Certainly against the Pelicans, there's a number of guys we can look at here. Again, we should have no Ante Zizic, no Matthew Dellavedova, no David Nwaba, and now no Rodney Hood. With those four guys out, my favorite guy probably ends up being very slightly at price, Alec Burks over Jordan Clarkson, but those are going to be my two favorite guys who I think are most likely to sort of spike you a tournament upside. But this news does bring a number of other players into play. You can certainly run Cedi Osman at 4,800 or 4,300 in a tournament. That can certainly happen. And again, it is at the position you would expect to be a little more successful in this matchup. I like coming at them from the forwards rather than from the ones and the two guards. Someone has Kirkman or Burks. I mean, Korkmaz is saving you quite a bit of money and is going to be more chalky. So points per dollar, I would prefer Korkmaz. Single lineup, I'm probably just going to take my 30 minutes of Korkmaz. But if you can come up with the extra, whatever it ends up being, $800, $900 per site, I think Burks is an actually exemplary tournament pivot. Earlier in the day, I thought earlier in the day before we got the Philadelphia news, Justin Holiday would have been interesting on DraftKings. He's 3,800 on DraftKings. The Grizzlies also playing on a back-to-back. Obviously, Justin Holiday didn't play yesterday, and Garrett Temple, who stands to be the player who ends up losing the most time to Justin Holiday, played 39 or 40 minutes in that game. So I'm not shocked if you get 28 minutes of Justin Holiday off the bench. And again, he's still got a number on him on FanDuel where he's still in the 5 somewhere. He's 3,800 on DK. If I had 150 lineups, I'd have 3 or 4 Justin Holiday. I think that's kind of cute, even if it isn't the game environment we would necessarily want to look at. Let me just talk about some other guys of interest who I may not have brought up yet. 5,900 for DeAndre Jordan on DK is pretty cheap. You can run him out in cash. Obviously not the best environment for him, but stacks nicely if you're managing to find some Embiid in your life. If I'm looking for one particular Mav, I would go with Luka Doncic in this environment. Unless, of course, you're playing on Yahoo, and then probably $11 Dennis Smith Jr. is the better way to go. DSJ also not out of play on FanDuel, though I would slightly play Fred VanVleet. Something I want to bring up that I haven't heard discussed at all today. Literally 0 times, and I spend almost all day every day looking at Twitter for news, is the fact that maybe Kawhi Leonard sits too. I don't think it's likely. I'll go about 75-25 he plays, but this is a front end of a back-to-back. The Raptors play the Pacers tomorrow. And I have not heard a single person mention that, hey, you may not have Kawhi Leonard in here too. He sat against Milwaukee on a back-to-back earlier this year. I still think it is more likely he plays because there is a chance they get Lowry back tomorrow. And, obviously having each of them play one end of the game would be a superior option. But I have some concern with Kawhi Leonard. So again, Kawhi wasn't the greatest play in this environment anyway. I guess that news or absence of news, but that particular piece of information that no one else seems to be talking about affects me in the following ways. I have a little bit more of appeal for, pre-lock running out Pascal Siakam, who always comes with a certain floor, but certainly steps into a larger upside in the absence of Kawhi Leonard. If we feel that's at all possible, Him at 62 on DK and 7,000 flat on FanDuel makes a little more sense for me as a tournament play. And he also, again, I don't have it up in front of me, was exceptionally productive in the 2 earlier matchups this year against the Bucks. One, of course, being with Kawhi Leonard out, but still an environment I think conducive to great success for him. So a little more appeal there. And then as far as having late pivot plans, if we get some news, if we hear something again, it's 90 minutes after lock that the Bucks and the Raptors tip off, I would have, a plan to be able to get, Norman Powell, who in that environment would see 25, 26 minutes if you have no Lowry and none of him. Delon Wright would enter your pool as an interesting pivot off of, highly owned Furkan, etc. So not a ton to do with that news, but interesting to see it almost wholly unreported at this point. It seems like Maurice Big Mo Harkless is going to play. He's still pretty cheap on Yahoo, but DK especially, where he's still $4,400. That does put a dent in the Evan Turner, who was going to be one of my more popular plays today. I would have moved him from a projection of like 18 minutes to 24 or 25. And at 35 or 3,600, I certainly would have had a bit more interest in running out some amount of ET in that spot. So, let us find some other things to talk about. These solo shows with tech issues make life really interesting. Don't sleep entirely on Damian Lillard. I had him above Kawhi the whole time and still do. I really don't hate the matchup with the Rockets that much. I don't hate McCollum either. Again, we saw what Clay recently did to the Rockets and what's a reasonable simulacrum, and the price on McCollum still makes a lot of sense. It's an interesting slate that there are 7 games here, and there really are a greater than number of guys I'm interested in a lot of situations. We have everything from uber studs at $11, $12, $13,000 in great spots with a chance to pay off those prices, and all sorts of intriguing value plays, some reasonable chalk value plays coming into play, and a massive late night hammer. So there really is, someone asked balanced or stud and scrub tonight on FanDuel. That's really tough for me to say. On FanDuel, I think I'm more inclined to play studs and scrubs due to FanDuel always pushes you that way a little bit more. It's nice when you can, throw in a couple monster guys and then you end up playing 3 guys who cost $3,500 to $3,900. And unlike doing that on DK, where you can't win a tournament unless all 3 of them hit, you can do it when only 2 of them hit on FanDuel, and that happens a vast, vast greater percentage of the time. Running out 3 cheap guys with upside on DK and trying to have them all get there, that's pretty difficult. On FanDuel, where you only need 2 of them to get there, that's obviously considerably more likely and makes those builds a lot more appealing. So certainly most of again, like most days, I've been tinkering with a FanDuel build and a DraftKings build the entire day. And almost the entire time on FanDuel, I've ended up having some triumvirate of Embiid or Durant or Harden, or usually at least 2 of the 3 there. A couple other guys. So let's talk about Memphis for a minute here. Again, there was the Justin Holiday situation. This is a Spurs team that is not the pushover they were for a large part of the year, and certainly showed some heart against the Raptors not that long ago. But the spot in which we've been a little more excited about tackling them throughout the year and even up to this point has been at the point when they played earlier this year. We did get a 50, 60-point game out of Mike Conley in a strong environment. And unlike Marc Gasol, who really doesn't get that much of a boost overall when Mike Conley is out due to the overall lessened efficiency in the offense, when Marc Gasol is out, Mike Conley becomes a stronger play. He averages a good 5 fantasy points a game more in games where Mike Conley does not participate. So I'm trying to keep up with some of the chats and all the other stuff going on all by my lonesome here. So I have a fair amount of interest in Mike Conley and would definitely be interested in shoehorning him in at 7,100 in the event we find out that Marc Gasol isn't going to play. I think for the moment it's decent to throw De'Aaron Fox in there and make that your planned pivot in the event we get that news as we get closer towards lock. The rest of the team, Jaren Jackson Jr., who I always like in tournaments, I will like even more with the possibility of him being out. It makes JaMychal Green a usable play if we find out that he's out. It makes Joakim Noah a reasonable punt. He has not looked good, and the minutes have descended from 13 to 12 to 11 to 6 to 4 to. So I don't know what happens if Marc Gasol's out. I would not be surprised to see 10 minutes. I would not be surprised to see 24, but certainly would, in my opinion, pick up some spot. Osman or Etuan Moore in DK cash. I would play Etuan Moore in cash between those two. I legit like Etuan on FanDuel. He's one of the guys. Who I really epitomizes being a value play on that site. The matchup with Cleveland ends up being largely neutral, but is an environment in which he can certainly get what he wants, which is floaters and threes. I don't think having, as opposed to some of the other guys, I don't think having Elf back off the shelf negatively affects Etuan Moore too much. And again, they're inclined to give him 30-plus minutes, and he does carry a big side. He's got a few 35-point games this year, and you can drop him if it doesn't work out. So I like having a lineup that has Etuan Moore and Furkan and TJ McConnell in it, or something of that nature. So yeah, I like Etuan Moore quite a bit. Not that cashy, but reasonable. I'll look at a couple other questions, maybe lead me to some questions. Willie Cauley-Stein or DeAndre Jordan? I think I would rather play Willie Cauley-Stein in a tournament and DeAndre Jordan in cash. Especially because I find myself building tournament lineups, really trying to get more guys in that late game and struggling. Thoughts on Bolden tonight? Yeah, I think he is. I would rather play in cash either TJ McConnell or Furkan Korkmaz. In tournaments, I would probably also rather play both of those guys just because of their ability to stick a halfway decent upside. I think Bolden is very much in play. A little bit suspect of the minutes relative to those other two guys, and a little bit suspect of his ability to put up the upside. But he's really, he's claimed a role in this environment. He's well ahead of Amir Johnson at this point, and I think he's fine, but I would have him in both cash and tournaments behind TJ McConnell and Furkan. I hadn't previously mentioned TJ McConnell specifically. Priced very nicely on DK FanDuel, where he's a super steals guy, so it's to some degree understandable that his FanDuel price would outpace his DK price when, if you run a query for players in the NBA, percentage of their fantasy points they acquire from steals, TJ McConnell would be in the top 10% of that data poll that you did there. So it's understandable that he's a little bit more difficult on FanDuel, but on DK where he's, I think it's 3,600 is the number or something, he ends up being one of my favorite value plays. Going back to talking about the if Marc Gasol is out, whether or not he's out, Kyle Anderson, normally I don't like seeing a player hit their first triple-double and then going right back to them the next day, but the possibility of Marc Gasol being out, the fact he contributes everywhere and still a very tolerable price at $4,900, and some revenge narrative if that is such a thing that bothers you. And maybe he's a little bit butthurt by the fact that they didn't match the offer for him, which really surprised me, honestly. Buford, etc. But Kyle Anderson, $4,900 still makes quite a bit of sense there. Trying to think of people like list your top plays with so many moving pieces. I generally dislike doing that because it's tough for me, but I suppose the guys who are some of my favorite tournament plays, I'm gonna re-update our ownership rankings so I can see where they and I agree and or disagree, although they tend to be right. Let's talk about Larry Nance for a second. We like Hood being out. He basically replaced Hood in the starting lineup last game. We're always worried about Larry Nance and usage. They've done everything possible this year to limit his usage and limit his time to a very frustrating extent. But the price has obviously fallen down. Like him more on FanDuel where he's dollar per dollar cheaper and one of those two sticky power forward spots. So there's actually a lot of power forwards I like, so there's actual value to the spot. But he's going to spend most of his time at the 4. I suppose there's a non-zero chance that Tristan gets less time. I expect Tristan to get roughly the 27 to 30 minutes that he got last night. He played 27 last night, but he is returning from injury. Maybe they take it easier on him. That would portend well for Nance. If you looked at the time he spent last game, he spent about 5 minutes getting some time on the court next to sort of as the backup center, but some of it was out there. Channing Frye basically played the proper backup center to Tristan Thompson in that game. But Larry Nance, FanDuel especially, I think, makes a solid play, although it's worth pointing out he spends most of his time here probably at the 4 instead of the 5, which is fantasy-wise less advantageous. What do you think about Drummond at, I think that said $24 on Yahoo, $11 on Yahoo, $34 on Yahoo? Yeah, I don't like Drummond much at all, even at $34. I don't think that's a terribly good price. I would rather play Blake Griffin. If Drummond was $34, I would rather play Blake up to like $39. A lot of people, I think, will play Andre Drummond due to what seems like a drastically reduced price, especially $34 on Yahoo is really cheap, and $7,900 on DraftKings is really cheap. But it's a really bad matchup for Drummond. Outside of one crazy encounter, someone was talking to me, earlier today, and like he had 83 points in one game, last year. That's true, but that was there was no Blake in that game. There was a number of other things. He's obviously not out of play, but your most frequent conclusion for playing this game out for Andre Drummond against Rudy Gobert is going to be Drummond pulling in somewhere around. I haven't projected for 34 fantasy points, so that should sort of answer your questions as far as maybe he gets 40, maybe he gets 45, but again, I don't think him randomly pulling down 80 again just is going to require some sort of shenanigans. Looking at our ownership projections, yep, this looks about where I expect. Right now we have Harden as the most expensive of our 5-digit friends at 22%, and Embiid sitting at 14%. I said a little while ago I'll have Embiid at about 20%, and people were suggesting that would be even higher than that. And people like to play Embiid. That has something to do with this year. You will see less correct reactionary swapping due to the presence of football and what's going on with that. Thoughts on Dante Exum? You could throw him in a tournament as a punt. I would just play T.J. McConnell. T.J. McConnell has been really... T.J. McConnell has 20 or more fantasy points. I want to say like 7 or 8 games in a row. He's been really consistent. 7 or 8 was apparently a little high, but 7? 20, 23, 23, 24, 26, 22. And again, the minutes, he's had 20 or more minutes for 10 plus games now. He's just a real part of this team here. So Exum is fine as a tournament pivot off that. You go with the theory that the Jazz win their game handily and that they feel no real reason to load up extra minutes on Rubio, who isn't necessarily 100%, but the matchup with Detroit isn't a cakewalk, and I keep getting them playing Detroit or them playing Cleveland confused because they just played Cleveland. Is Brunson playable? I don't think so. He's just not an upside guy. I would much, again, rather play McConnell. But I would probably rather play Exum, for example. There's a lot of bargain point cards I would play before I put Jalen Brunson in there. Again, I think Dennis Smith starts in places 32 whatever minutes. I don't think we have specific news on... we do. All right, so both Barea and Devin Harris are out. That makes it closer to playable. Again, you still have the rest of that team largely in and healthy, but yeah, I guess Brunson is playable under those circumstances, but I still think you're seeing 17, 19 minutes, something in that range. So 17 or 19 minutes of Jalen Brunson is not super exciting. Thoughts on Julius Randle? Yeah, I mean, it's a smash spot for him. The price is obviously high again, but I liken him to sort of Tim Hardaway Jr. yesterday, where the opportunity is there and he just hasn't happened to have super upsided in a while. And I don't think anyone's surprised to see 50 or so out of Randle, but it's just a spot where the roster construction leads you away from him a little bit. But I certainly don't mind Julius Randle in just about anything at this point. Does Brian Harris out help Dennis Smith? Yes, it portends him for 3 or 4 more minutes higher. Thoughts on Elf? I like him more than Dennis Smith Jr., where they are priced similarly. I like him a little more than Ricky Rubio, so I like Elf off the shelf. Again, he played 30-plus minutes in his last game back. Not a back-to-back for the Pelicans, so we can expect a good run there. Is Brunson playable? Again, we handled that. Fred VanVleet, Reggie Jackson, or Sexton on FanDuel? Oh, God. Probably all 3 of those are very rough for me. I probably... well, first of all, I'd probably play... You're asking on FanDuel, and all 3 of those guys are in the same price range, so I'd probably play Dennis Smith Jr., but assuming your other point guard is already Dennis Smith Jr., oh boy, I would probably play Freddie, then Sexton, then Reggie, but I'm not thrilled about any of the 3. Is it okay to stack Embiid with McConnell and Korkmaz in a DK GPP? Yes. Not only is it okay, it's legitimately good. All of those players are better with those other players in there because of positive game correlation. Again, you don't worry about playing multiple guys on the same team when they cost $3,500. It's just not a relevant negative disincentive. And so not only is it okay to do that, each of those players is better in turn for having those other guys there. Dwight Powell thoughts? With Dirk out, he makes more of a sense as a tournament punt. I was thinking, I believe these were the 76ers and the Mavs. This is the first time they've played this year. I think they played the 2 preseason games in Shanghai and Shenzhen, in which Dwight Powell was very good in both of them because, again, Dirk wasn't playing and DeAndre wasn't playing. A long way around to saying there's no Dirk, so certainly Dwight Powell makes some sense. You don't need something crazy to happen for him to be good, and it's really not difficult to imagine getting some foul trouble on DeAndre Jordan, going up against Embiid, who obviously is one of the players in the NBA who can do the most of that. Which combo would have more raw fantasy points, Dennis Smith and Korkmaz, or TJ McConnell and Austin Rivers? I have Dennis Smith and Korkmaz for 1.2 points higher collectively. Austin Rivers, again, makes a lot of sense on FanDuel where that number is droppable. And it's just been seeing tons of time, and the shots are going up and the time is going up. So I'm fine with Austin Rivers, but again, $4,900 on DK, not as advantageous a price. Probably more inclined to look elsewhere most of the time. Harden or AD, both are 58 on Yahoo. Just raw points, I'm going to stick with James Harden at this point. I have him projected about 4 or 5 points higher than Anthony Davis. I have them both very respectable. I have James Harden at 68 and Anthony Davis at 63 and change, I think. But I would have Harden as just who's going to score more points there. Ownership on Yahoo, I don't want to guess that offhand, but I'm guessing you get much better ownership on Anthony Davis. Again, eligible sort of at less positions. You can play Harden 3 places there. You can only play Anthony Davis 2, and centers are super cheap, and he's a center. So your ownership should be much nicer on Anthony Davis, and I would keep that in mind. Do you advocate playing McConnell and Korkmaz in tournaments, even with their respective 40 and 30% projected ownerships on DK? I wouldn't go so far as to say I advocate playing them, but it's a very nice game environment with those other 2 guys out. I think you get 30 to 31 minutes is where I have Korkmaz projected, and like 28 for TJ McConnell, and they're both really cheap. So I'm fine playing them in tournaments. There are plenty of useful tournament pivots. Hopefully some of what I've brought up is Dirk washed, missed all his field goals last night. No, missing all your field goals in one game does not make you washed. Thoughts on Rudy Gay, FanDuel 5.7K? Yeah, it would certainly not be out of play in a GPP. If I saw Rudy Gay in a tournament lineup, I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. He's been really, really good this year. The usage has been inconsistent, minor nicks and nags and injuries here and there. But I think he has enough upside you can justify that play. Obviously, the matchup with Memphis is not something we are super excited over, but, it would be tough for me on FanDuel. He would probably be my favorite of the 3 real playable guys there on FanDuel. I would probably prefer him slightly to both DeRozan and Aldridge, and obviously you're saving some money. And he's put up, many towards 50 fantasy point upside games this year, so I like Rudy Gay just fine. Thoughts on Alec Burks at 4,500 if I'd sit? He is sitting, and I like Alec Burks quite a bit. Burks and Anderson or Korkmaz and Bielitsa on FanDuel GPP. If you have no other Kings, I would play Korkmaz and Bielitsa. Otherwise, I'd be a little more inclined towards Kurtz and Anderson. I just want to have some Sacramento exposure. Giannis and Rivers or Harden and Evan Turner. I'm going to play Harden and Evan Turner. I'm not going to play Giannis. He's literally on 0 for any sort of upside games career against Toronto through literally a dozen games plus. So maybe that turns around here. Maybe he throws it, but I can't get behind spending Giannis's price. I mean, I have him projected literally 15.5 points less than James Harden. It's really hard for me to go there. If you're building 150 lineups and you want to have some Giannis to be exposed to a guy who obviously does have, in some sense, a 75-point upside, sure. But it's really hard in the world of Anthony Davis in an unstoppable matchup where the blowout and the pace are the only things that stop him, and Harden, averaging 70-plus fantasy points for a dozen games, and Embiid to passionately advocate for, and Antetokounmpo. What are your favorite plays from the late bomb? Yeah, again, for the Warriors, I have them ranked Durant, Clay, Draymond, Steph, with a pretty small differentiation between them because I really like all four of them, and they've been really strong in this matchup, and all of them have shown a very real upside there. And for the Kings, I have them Healed, Fox, Bogdanovich, Bielitsa, Willie. Norman Powell, Gerald Green, and FanDuel GPP. As of this writing, I think I would stick with Gerald. I'm concerned with what they do with those wing minutes. There's a lot of talk about Gerald Green and Daniel House. I do think there's some reasonable chance that you get more than 8 minutes. I think James Ennis played last game, and those minutes are going to come back from somewhere. Ricky looks to be sore, FYI. I'm looking at a picture, and it shows Ricky Rubio doing this, and it's saying Ricky Rubio is sore. I don't know. I've played a few thousand basketball games, and I do this before just about all of them, so I'm going to need a little more sourcing than the fact that he is stretching out his shoulder. Shakamer Green, who has more upside for a GPP. Who has more upside? The highest upside would still probably be Draymond for me. I mean, Draymond, I like Pascal Siakam a lot, but Draymond can score 80 fantasy points in a game. Pascal would require a lot of things for that to happen. I really like Pascal in the spot, but just more pure upside Draymond for me. Does Jaren Jackson Jr. benefit the most if Gasol is out? If not, then who? I would say Conley benefits the most. He looked good again yesterday. 2 games ago, again, his shoulder was all jacked up, made none of his shots, had like 3 fantasy points, and truly career woat game. Yesterday was a great spot for him, but I and a lot of other people were afraid to pull the trigger, and I didn't push for him at all, and he looked great. He went out yesterday and looked extremely good. He's probable today with Gasol questionable, so I would say that it's a little more Conley for me than Jaren Jackson Jr., but certainly a boost for him as well. And then, the other bigs picking up the time mostly, Jermichael and Theory Joakim Noah. Pascal and DeAndre Jordan, or Nance and Willie Cauley-Stein, DK Turney. I go Pascal and DeAndre Jordan there. Ibaka and DK. Yeah, he's still priced to a very reasonable number. You're hoping you randomly get Kawhi Leonard out. That would certainly help that play. But similar to Pascal in that you hope Kawhi is out, and the whatever odds chance you put on that, we'll call it 20% at the moment, would make you super happy, and you're not dead if he isn't. So I'm fine with some Ibaka there. FanDuel got Chandler starting. He's going to be 5% on. I'll go under 5%, but we'll see in a little bit. Yeah, they've done a couple times recently. They had Boban starting when he didn't touch the core. They've had a few guys starting who weren't starting recently. Alright, we are coming down to it. I'm going to do a little bit more news scanning, which is always exciting and compelling shows. Sorry, that's what happens when I do it by myself. A couple starting lineups now, but no news that we didn't really overly expect. Again, our top 5 ownership, and you can see the exact rankings and the numbers if you sign up at allsmo.com. TJ McConnell, Alfred Payton, Furkan Korkmaz, Kyle Anderson, DeAndre Jordan, Ben Simmons, Willie Cauley-Stein, James Harden, Kevin Durant, Alec Burks, Andre Drummond, Jonah Bolden, De'Aaron Fox, Bogdan Bogdanovich, and I don't have any significant disagreements with this other than the fact that we have Embiid like 17th on this list at 10,800 at 14 or 15%. I still do think he'll be at 20% or a touch over that. It is it's a great spot for him, and you can very easily get 70 out of him today, saving a couple $1,000. I think it's less likely you get the 90 or 100 that become reasonably possible. It's worth pointing out if he keeps it going. I mean, we had his recent game where he had 20 and 10 in the first quarter or whatever the hell that game was, where he was on pace for some absolutely insane number and just let up a little bit to stop it being so completely out of control against. Is that the Clips game or Phoenix game? Either way, in his last couple games, he's got 65 and 75 or whatever. So there's a lot of upside with Joel, and not going to shock me if we randomly do catch that 90-point game out of him somewhere. But Sans Butler, I do think Joel will come in a little higher than we currently have that projection. But other than that, these other dozen or so on top look right about where I would expect them. Yeah, I think we'd end up with Kawhi lower than we possibly have him posted here. But yeah, I agree, pretty spot on with about 19 in the top 20. Anthony Davis at 11% is someone I would want some real exposure to. It's good, but yeah, there's just simply a gigantic batch of amazing plays today. To be honest, I really like this slate. Loading up my tweet deck and my Google alerts, looking for anything else that we might get breaking in these last 2 minutes that we can pass on. Zaza is out, which is slightly relevant for a couple plays if you're playing Pistons for some reason. So many NFL tweets. Hope you all bet on the Colts. Looking. 45 seconds left. It's a lot like yesterday in which we have one game at lock that is not the most exciting environment, put mildly. And there we are, ladies and gentlemen. We have arrived at lock. I'll go ahead and take a quick look at, again, what should be some pretty unimpressive DK ownership. Let's see the $200,000 pull-up jumper with $50,000 to first place. I'll look at some ownership here, and then we'll let you all get on with your evening. Sorry for those early technical difficulties. Hopefully managed to cover most of which was relevant. Again, we've it's a little different on days when I'm alone. We still have, there's still a podcast that precedes me and an earlier show that I think today was Josh and Adam. I don't want to speak out of school, but we have lots and lots of free content. So as we get down towards lock, we try to discuss, game theory and ownership and various other things a little bit more than just rehashing the slate on its entirety again. Probably is better use of time. So yeah, Andre Drummond 18%, Blake Griffin 7%. Daddy dislikes it. I have Blake Griffin projected for like 9 more fantasy points. So we will see how that goes. But Andre Drummond very significantly on 79 at 7,900, 18% for Andre Drummond, 6.75% for Blake Griffin, 6.3% for Ricky Rubio, 6% for Rudy Gobert. I would have preferred him to Drummond. 5.3% for Reggie Jackson, 3.5% for Jingles, 3.2% for JJ, Derek Favors 2.9%, Reggie Bullock 2.8%, Donovan Mitchell 2.3%, Dante Exum 2%, Luke Kennard 1.5%, Kyle Korver 0.5%, Bruce Brown 0.3%, Langston Galloway 0.18%, John Lure 0.09%, Jose Calderon 0.04%, Royce O'Neal 0.02%, Stanley Johnson 0.02%, Pablo Cephalosha 0.01%, Ekpe Udo 0.00%, Howell Neto 0.00. No one may have played themselves. Stanley Johnson was not 100%, but I'm pretty sure he was in. That may be the first time all year, admittedly. There was only one 7 p.m. game. Only one lock time game, more accurately. And it's, it's a smaller slate, but I think there's a legit chance that for the first time this year, no one may have played a player who is not at least with the team and active. I'm checking. I'm pretty sure he's in there and going. Yeah, Stanley Johnson was available today. I don't think, again, this is a landmark moment. Drummond is 70% owned in high stakes cash on Yahoo. I faded. How should I feel? I need to see what the other centers were and the ownerships were on and even the prices on the other guys. But I think John gets to 35 tonight. I don't think you are happy with 35 for $35. You have a feeling Embiid is going to get rolled out? That's a mean thing to say. Yeah. So nobody played themselves. I'm staggered. I am shocked. This will be the first time this year that looking at the post-lock time that no one is owned a single share who is not with the team and active. I'm 99% sure. You're making me double check my Pablo Cephalosha, and I gotta check and make sure Ekpe Udoh is with the team, but I'm pretty sure he is. So there it is. Compelling. I know what you're thinking, oh, that's really exciting. Yeah. Alright. Nobody played themselves. I am aghast. I am agog. I am out of here. So I will be back tomorrow. Some more weekend basketball. Send me tweets, make fun of me for not being able to get the audio to work before. Tell me how much money you make tonight. Tell me how much money I cost you tonight. I am intrigued to hear how everyone does. So with that, I am off to the gym, actually, shoot some hoops myself. Best of luck in all your contests, everyone. Good night now.